Hello, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I'm Shelly Troyer with iTech, and welcome to our 14th week of Tech Tips Live, the weekly series where we get together and talk about different ways to incorporate technology here at K-State into your daily workflow. A few housekeeping items, just like always. I have muted everybody's microphones, so we're going to try to save questions to the end. If you have a question and you would like to unmute your microphone, at any time, feel free to go ahead and do that, or you can send questions in over the chat feature. I will check those chat features towards the end of the presentation, but if something does come up that's more pertinent to the exact thing that I'm talking about, feel free to interrupt me. So with that, let's just go ahead and dive into the presentation. Today, I am going to be talking about the Zoom webinar feature. If you remember back in January on the first Tech Tips session, I talked about the webinar feature in those couple slides that I gave back in January. So the webinar feature is a little bit different than a regular Zoom meeting. What we're holding right now is a regular Zoom meeting. With that, I'm allowed to, the host of the meeting can be interactive with all the other participants, up to 50 participants in a regular Zoom meeting. There's screen sharing, there's chat, you can turn people's video on and off, things like that. In a Zoom webinar, there is up to 25 panelists, and the panelists are kind of very similar to a regular Zoom meeting where they can interact and talk back and forth to each other. But then on top of that, there is a separate link that you can send to up to 500 attendees who kind of have a view-only screen of what is happening between all your panelists. So if you just had one person doing the majority of the talking, that's fine. Have them give the presentation, and then those up to 500 attendees can view what's going on, and then they also have the option to send in chat questions, or they can have a question and answer that can be either answered live, by the panelists reading the question and then, answering it live, or by just one of the panelists sending a chat message back to that person who asked the question and answer. Just like regular Zoom meetings, webinar feature, you can join from a Mac, PC, tablet, smartphone, Android, iPhone, or a room system, so a Polycom room system. You can still join using those devices. It has a live polling option that you can either set up before your webinar starts, or you can actually set that up during your event. It probably takes a little bit longer and is not as clean and clear when you're doing it during the event, so I do recommend having those set up beforehand. But that live polling feature is kind of nice if your situation calls for that. And then at the end of your webinar, that's a little bit different from a regular Zoom meeting, there's a bunch of reports that you can run that have analytics regarding how many people attended, how many people might have registered for the webinar but didn't attend, who asked the questions, how many questions were asked, what those questions were, how they were answered, things like that. So it just has a lot more analytics that you can go back and look at after your webinar is finished. So some of these slides I did already show back in January, but I wanted to go ahead and show them again and go over everything. This is what the view would look like for the attendee. They would just see the main panelist talking in the upper left-hand corner. I kind of made it bigger there so everyone could see. There's audio settings where you can test your speakers on your computer. There's a question and answer box, there's a chat box, and there's also a new raise your hand feature. So if you just needed to raise your hand and call attention to say, hey, look at my question or anything like that, the attendees do have the option to raise their hand. This is what it looks like from the panelists, very similar to a regular Zoom meeting. All your controls are still down there at the bottom of the screen, but every panelist will be able to see this, so to not just the one who is hosting the webinar. And then all the panelists can pull up those question and answer questions that come in and be able to either say that they're going to be answered live or answered by text. And then another thing I did want to point out on this slide, even though I don't have a picture of it, the chat box is here as well. With the chat, attendees can send a chat to everyone. Panelists can send a chat to everyone. You can send a chat to just your other panelists. You can send a chat to a specific panelist, so if it's just a one-on-one thing that you wanted to get out there. or you can send it to a specific attendee, but when you send it to a specific attendee, all of your panelists will see that as well. So if one of the attendees has a question that either more than one panelist can answer, or just a specific panelist, they'll be able to still see that question. And then another thing, if you wanted, as the host or one of the panelists, if you wanted to disable the viewer chat, so you didn't want to allow them to have that chat feature and just do the question and answer, or neither one, you can take that, you can disable that feature so that they don't have the ability to do that. One of the newer features that Zoom Webinar has added is the ability to start with a practice session, or the practice mode. So when you're scheduling your webinar, and I'll show you this in one of our later slides, when you're scheduling, if you check on a box that says practice mode, on the day of your webinar, if you want to go and start your webinar and make sure everything is working properly before you let those attendees come and see what's going on, you can do that. And then when you're ready to make it go live, you would just click on that broadcast button, and then you'll see this message pop up that says the webinar is now broadcasting to all viewers. So I think that's been pretty helpful for people who have been using the webinar tool on campus to be able to practice in advance. I think I went over this the last time, but you can upgrade an attendee to a panelist. So if someone did ask a really good question over the chat and you wanted them to be able to actually ask their question live, if they had a camera and a microphone, they would be able to do that. So you would upgrade them to attendee, they would ask their question, and then if you don't want them to be, or I'm sorry, you would upgrade them to a panelist, they would ask their question, and if you wanted to demote them back to attendee after that, you can do that. So that's kind of a nice feature. Okay, so getting started. When you are ready, or you know that you do want to have a webinar, I do have to assign you the webinar license to your Zoom account before you're allowed to get started. We do have 2 webinar licenses on campus for general use, so it's kind of a first come, first serve thing. If you tell me months in advance and you wanted to kind of get the registration part started, and you wanted to send that out to people, and then someone else needed to have that webinar feature before your actual event, I can reassign those rights and then just give it back to you when you need it. But we can work that out when those reservations start coming in. And then another thing, everyone must be running version 3.0 or higher in order to access the Zoom webinar feature. Okay, so once I grant you those rights to the webinar, you'll see on your profile page that you have another tab that says My Webinars. That tab will not appear if you do not have the rights associated with your account. So you log on to your Zoom profile page, go to that tab, and then that's when you can start to schedule your webinar. Just like a regular Zoom meeting that you're scheduling, you would type in a topic. If it's a one-time event, you would put in the date and the time. You can add a description if you want to. This is where you could disable that question and answer section if you just want your attendees to just view everything and not be able to interact with questions. If it was a recurring webinar that you needed to have over and over again, and you wanted the same information, the same connection information for every one of your webinars, you would do a recurring webinar. With the recurring webinar, you cannot do the registration feature that is built in. So it has to be a registration-less webinar. On Zoom's end, you can always use a third-party registration tool if you wanted to have a recurring webinar but still have a registration. Okay, so now that you've scheduled a webinar, there's a bunch of options that you can do to customize your webinar. The first one that we're going to talk about is the branding option. So with branding, it's pretty simple. All you really have to do is follow the limitations that are laid out on this slide right here, as far as the size of the image that you're wanting to upload. But you can do a banner and a logo, or just one or the other. And this is just kind of an example of what that would look like. It would show up on the main registration page if you have your webinar set up to have a registration, and then also on the email that is sent out to your participants of the webinar. So this would be the banner, and then this would be the logo over here. So as long as you're in those, the guidelines set out for the image size, you should be okay with that. The next thing we're going to talk about is how you invite your panelists to the webinar. So basically all you need is their email address. You would type in their name and their email address here, and then once you save it, Zoom automatically sends that person the connection information to your webinar. If you needed to go back and delete that person later, you can, but this is basically how you would send that information to the panelists of the webinar. This is the email that is sent to them, pretty straightforward. Next, how you invite your attendees. So once again, the attendees are the view only with the chat panel and question and answer. You can copy the invitation and then paste it into an email. You can have Zoom send you the email invitation, or you can just copy the link that is posted right here and have your attendees go to this website to register. If you did not want to have your attendees register, that's where you would click on the registration list option, and then you wouldn't even have this option to send them a registration. It would show up, you have selected a registration list webinar for your event. As far as what the registration process entails, you can select specific fields that you want your attendees to answer, and you can make those required or not required. And then you can also add your own custom questions if you don't see anything, what you want to ask your attendees on this list. You can add that as a custom question. When you send the link out to attendees to register, if you want those to be automatically approved so you don't have to do anything extra once they send in their information, you have that option. Or you can select manually approve, so that means once they do enter their information, it's sent back to you, and then you have to actually click on a button saying, yes, I approve this person to be able to join the webinar. And this is just the slide where it allows you to create your own custom questions. Okay, this is what the attendee registration URL looks like. This is the minimum amount of requirements. So first name, last name, email, and then they have to confirm their email. And then if you had checked any of those extra boxes or added a custom question, they would also show up on here. And then as soon as your attendee fills out the information, they just click on register, and then they will get the connection information emailed to them. This is a copy of the invitation if you didn't just want to send that person the link. This is the invitation that Zoom creates to send them to register for the event. And then you can add custom wording on there at the end if you needed to. This is where you would add your custom information for the email. This is the confirmation email that the attendee would get after they register for the webinar. Okay, managing the attendee. So after someone has filled out the information to register, if they decide they can no longer come, or if they lose their registration email and forget how to join the conference, you can find them on this list, copy their registration information. You can cancel their registration, or you can select to resend them the email so they have that connection information again. This is also nice just to see how many people have actually registered for your event and to see kind of who's going to attend. This is just an extra slide on there to talk about the registration list webinar. So if you wanted to use a third-party tool, or if you just wanted to not worry about the registration, you would check on that option when you're scheduling. And this is what it would look like under the invite attendees section. It says it is a registration list, and then everybody would get this same link. To clarify, when you do have a registration set up for your webinar, the link that is sent to every attendee is a unique link, so you don't want to forward that to multiple people. It's just for that one person who registers. For a registration-less webinar, one where you are not requiring information ahead of time, it is the same link for everybody. Then once they click on that link for the registration list, they're required to type in their name and email at that time. Okay, email settings. There's a bunch of things that you can do to kind of customize the emails that are being sent to the panelists and the attendees. If you as the host don't want to receive all those emails back and instead you wanted to set a different email address to get all those like the managing participant emails, you could change that right here. So just a lot of different ways that you can customize. If you wanted to send a follow-up email to attendees or a follow-up email to people who registered for your event but didn't end up coming, you can personalize all of that. Okay, next is the polls option. This is kind of where you would go to set up that poll creation in advance. Zoom would also take you back to this same section if you wanted to create your polls during your webinar. So you can see there it can be single choice or a multiple choice option. You type your question and then type in a couple answers that they could select from. Here's kind of what it would look like. So just you can have however many answers you want, and then once they click on it, anyone who is taking that poll, you can post the results to everyone during your webinar, and it tells you how they answered. So that's kind of a nice feature. And then the last tab that you'll see on there, generate prospects, and I believe it's Pardot. Pardot is a marketing automation product that Zoom has it allows you to send information to that so that Pardot can help you with your marketing of the webinar. I don't know a lot of information about Pardot, so if you need me to get you in contact with someone at Zoom to ask more questions about it, I would be happy to do so. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to talk about is the reports that you can access after your webinar is over. You would find that back on your profile page under the reports tab. And like I kind of said before, you can have an attendee report, the question and answer report, the polls, how people answered the different poll questions. And you can generate those. Most of them are an Excel file format. So then you can download those and use it for analytics after your webinar is over. So at this point, that's kind of all I had to talk about for the Zoom webinar feature. I'd like to open it up to questions. I believe we also have some people joining us today from NACADA who actually use the Zoom webinar tool quite frequently, and I was going to ask them to kind of speak up and add anything that I might have missed, or just give us some tips about how they have been using it, and if it's how useful it's been for their group. So Gary Cunningham and Lee Cunningham are both online, so I'll let you guys decide who wants to speak up about it.
Lee, you want to start first? As you host? Okay, you don't. Okay. Basically, Lee hosts our webinars for NACADA. We have half a dozen of these a year with varying attendances ranging from around 100 people or more. So we have a pretty good attendance with them. We don't have any problems. We find it's pretty easy to work with. We did work on the Adobe Connect platform before, and this is a much simpler operation for us as far as setting up and management and keeping track of things. Some of the biggest concerns we deal with on it are things like gatekeeping. We have people attend our events that we do registration lists, so there's the same link going to everyone, and we do have the concern of someone registering for our event and sharing it with 400 of their closest friends. Zoom at this point doesn't have any gatekeeping, so that's one of the things we have to kind of manually manage. Not a big problem, but just to be aware of it. We can cause a problem if that's one of your concerns. As far as the way it works and the way we deal with it, we find it fairly easy to work with panelists from around the country that come in and are our groups that sit in front of this technology without having to spend an inordinate amount of time orienting them to it. If you've used Zoom, then you've used the webinar platform. It adds a different layer of participation. You've got now panelists and participants. So you're just keeping track of who can do what. So we've enjoyed it. It's worked out really well for us in our usage.
Awesome. Lee, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just say that we've been doing webinars this is our 10th season, so we've had all of the K-State platforms. We started on Wimba, we use Zoom. We find this one to be the most stable so far. We have much less difficulty with connectivity and being bounced out and all of those things, so we're really happy with that.
Excellent. Thank you both for your additional comments. I know you guys do use it a lot, so I was glad you guys could join us today. So I haven't seen any questions come in over the chat. I want to open that up again right now, give people kind of a last chance to send any questions in over the chat. Okay, if any questions do come up in the future, please feel free to contact me. My email is shellytroyer@ksu.edu, or you can call me at 532-3323. Let me go ahead and share my screen one more time. If you want to see the recording of today's event, just like any of our past events, you can go to our Tech Tips live website that I have pulled up here, and just find whatever session you are wanting to look at and use the drop down, and then the video will be posted. Last week we have that one posted over the mobile apps, so we will get today's video up there as soon as we can. Next week, I hope everyone can join us, where Kat Adams is going in network operations is going to be talking about phishing. So that's it for today, and I hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.